Here. Thanks for joining. I want to congratulate you first on making it this far. I know that it can be a big decision to go to a foreign country for, a couple of years, maybe several years of your life. And I do think that this is going to be a rewarding and enjoyable experience for you. So, what I want to do today, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I want to walk you through some tips and insights as you kind of embark on your visa journey, which is one of the key components to actually getting to the United States so that you can study. So, as Courtney mentioned, I was a consular officer, kind of commonly referred to as a visa officer, for several years. And during that career, I was stationed abroad where I conducted tens of thousands of visa interviews. And I will tell you that during the busy kind of summer months and winter months, much of my work was interviewing students, just like each of you. And quite often, I would say far too often, I encountered student applicants who were just unprepared, or maybe they didn't understand how the process worked. They weren't ready to explain why they were qualified for a visa. And unfortunately, and I'll talk about this in a moment, there are so many constraints on the visa officer's time that I didn't have a choice but to refuse their application. And I will tell you that visa officers do not like passing out bad news. They do not enjoy denying applicants. I personally hated it. And so I decided that instead of interviewing applicants and denying many of them, I would enjoy a career where I could actually help you understand how to prepare, walk you through the process, and then hopefully my goal here is that all of you will maximize your chance of a successful outcome. So that's exactly what I want to do for the next 45 minutes or so. I'm going to talk about the student visa process from a high level, give you an idea of the kind of journey that you will go through. I'm going to talk about a couple of changes and modifications to this process over the past year or so. Then I'm going to talk about the visa interview itself. What should you expect? I'm going to try to, dispel some myths and rumors so that you know what you're getting into and hopefully you know how to best prepare. Then I'm going to answer as many of your questions as we have time for. So before I jump into it, as Courtney mentioned, as I mentioned, I am an immigration attorney. However, that said, the point of this session is not for me to provide specific legal advice. If you have specific questions, please do not leave this process to chance. Reach out to somebody who's qualified to give you advice. Reach out to an immigration attorney. I'd be happy if you reach out to me, but honestly, I just want you to reach out to somebody who knows what they're talking about so that you don't find yourself in an otherwise avoidable situation. So let's talk about the student visa process. And sorry for the green squiggly line on the slide. I don't know where that came from. It's one of the joys of Zoom. Anyway, the visa process from a high level. I like to think of it in really kind of 5 steps. So, as soon as you've been accepted to a school or a program in the United States, you'll probably go through a couple of steps. Thank you, Courtney. You'll probably go through a couple of steps to, confirm that you will be attending that school. You will probably need to confirm that you have enough financial arrangements to pay for your program. Then your school will issue an official document called the I-20 form. With that I-20 form, you can now begin your visa journey. And the first step in that journey is to go online and fill out an online application form called the DS-160. We'll talk a little bit about the DS-160, but after you submit that form, then you can schedule your visa interview. You attend your visa interview. Hopefully, fingers crossed, you are all successful. But before your visa may be issued, your officer will have to review your social media and your general online persona. So I'll talk a little bit about that as well. And then finally, after all of that is done, your visa is approved, your passport gets back to you, then you can finally travel to the United States and start school. Now, one thing that I want you to keep in mind, and this is a recent update from last September, is that you are now limited to where you can schedule your visa interview. It used to be the situation that you could go anywhere in the world. And so, if maybe there was a lengthy wait before you could find an open interview appointment in your home country, you could travel somewhere else. That is no longer a possibility. So, keep in mind that you need to schedule your interview in your home country, or in some limited situations, if you are a long term or a permanent resident somewhere else, you may be able to schedule your interview there. But note that you will not be able to travel for the purpose of scheduling a visa interview any longer. And that really brings up the first tip that I have for you, which is do not delay. Start this process as soon as you get your I-20 form, because there are delays throughout the process, as you will see, and it may be kind of difficult to find a visa interview in the near future. So start the process now. And I would start calculating backwards from kind of that end date, the date that you plan to travel to the United States. And so let's focus on that for a moment. With the student visa process, with an F1 student visa, you are expected to enter the United States within 30 days of the program start date that's listed on your I-20 form. So in this example, it's the 4th of May, 2016. You are expected to be in the United States before that date, but you can't enter more than 30 days before that date. Now, the flip side of that is also true. If you attend your visa interview right up to that date, or maybe after that date, if your visa officer is not convinced that you can travel to the United States within that 30-day window, your visa will be denied. So start as early as you can so that you have enough time to get your visa, to get your passport back, travel to the United States before the program start date listed on your I-20 form. And so once you get that I-20 form, the first thing that you can do to start that journey without delay is to start the online application form, which is the DS-160. So if you navigate to ceac.state.gov, you will see a form that looks like this on the screen. And let me give you some general tips. The DS-160 form is not difficult. Now, it does take a while. There are lots of questions, but none of them are super complicated. It's not something that only an expert can do or only a lawyer can do. The form is really just asking for your basic details, details about your parents, details about your work history, your education history. And so I want to urge each of you to fill this form out yourself. I know it's very common in many parts of the world to hire an agent or somebody else to do this for you, but this is where complications can arise because agents don't know everything about you. Only you know all of your details. Agents are also not really incentivized to pay attention to the details. They're incentivized to fill out as many of these forms as quickly as they can because that's how they make money. So even seemingly trivial mistakes, even a typo, can lead to significant complications in your visa journey. And so my strong recommendation to each of you is to fill this form out yourself. Offer as much detail as you possibly can in each of the questions, and then check your answers multiple times before you submit the form. Once you submit this form, you cannot go back and change anything. Your answers are essentially locked in place. So make sure it's accurate because, again, even a little minute typographical error could result in a denial. One other thing I would recommend is to actually print your responses before you submit the form. For whatever reason, after you submit this form online, you cannot go back and look at the answers that you provided. And so if you're kind of like me, and you may wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning saying, oh my gosh, what did I say to that answer? You won't know unless you saved your answers or maybe printed out screenshots before you submitted the form. So please do fill this out by yourself because details matter, and you are essentially certifying that every response you provide in this form is accurate. This is really the first step in what we kind of call an exercise of your credibility. And so if an officer finds any error, they might decide that they can't trust anything else that you have to say, and that might result in a denial. So do it yourself. Now, one thing that I want to talk about specifically in the DS 160 is the social media question. Remember, it is now mandatory for student applicants to go through a social media review, which I'll talk about in a moment. But that process begins with the DS 160 form. So there's a question that you can see on the left side, which asks if you have used any social media platform within the past 5 years. Now, please, I cannot stress this enough. List all social media platforms that you have used in the last 5 years when you get to this question. And there is a drop-down menu that you can see right here, which lists the platforms that the State Department cares about. Now, this is a little weird because you'll see things like MySpace that nobody uses, but you don't see things like WeChat, which a lot of people use. So if you have any of the platforms listed on this list, or if you have used any of these platforms in the past 5 years, please mention them right here. And there's a link that you can see where it says add another, add as many platforms as you have. Because when your visa officer goes through your social media and they look through all of your accounts, if they find an account that you did not include in your DS 160, that alone will likely result in a refusal or a denial of your application. So this is really important. I would also list the website address or the URL for each of your account where it says social media identifier, not just the username. And then the final thing here is you are required to set all of your accounts to public. Because of course, if somebody's looking through your Facebook account or your, Instagram account, they need to be able to see what you've posted and what you've been tagged in. So set everything to public, but then as soon as you get your passport back with your visa inside, then you can feel free to change everything back to private if that's what you want to do. So this is really important. As you're filling out your DS 160, please take this question very seriously. Even if you have a platform, again, that's on this drop-down menu, like maybe you have an X or a Twitter account and you've never posted something on it. Just the fact that you have an account in your name means that you should list it here, because the last thing you want is for a visa officer to find that and then say, well, they didn't list it on their DS 160. So the next question is, what is the officer looking for after the visa interview when they go through your social media? What does this review look like? Well, they're looking for kind of scary things and then other things. And so let me walk you through that. The scary things they're looking for, and hopefully this doesn't apply to anybody in this session right now, they're looking for things like evidence that you are supportive of a terrorist organization. Maybe evidence that you have done or are planning to do something illegal. Like if there's photos of you, doing drugs or holding weapons or something like that. They're looking for evidence that you might harbor a hostile attitude towards the US government or United States citizens, or just evidence of hate speech, like anti-Semitic speech or racist speech, something like that. So I hope that this doesn't apply to anybody, but that's kind of the first thing that the visa officer will be looking for. However, beyond that, they're also looking for other issues, which might actually be a little bit more common. So first, they're looking for evidence online that you may have violated a previous US visa. So things like a photo that looks like you were working in the United States, maybe under a previous student visa or a previous tourist visa, where there are firm restrictions on your ability to work, that could lead to questions and ultimately a denial. And then also any inconsistencies. So maybe a difference between what you said in your DS 160 versus what may appear online versus what you may have said in your visa interview can raise serious concerns. And let me give you an example of this. Let's say that on your LinkedIn account, you said that you started your current job on March 1st, 2024. But in your DS 160, you said that you started that job on November 1st, 2023. Well, that doesn't match up. And if a visa officer sees that, they may conclude that you were lying somewhere. And because of that, they may conclude that they can't trust you, and that might lead to a denial. So, my recommendation here is to look through your social media. Make sure that everything is accurate. Make sure that there's no typos or inconsistencies. And then beyond that, be prepared to explain anything that might lead to a concern during your visa interview. I have never actually recommended that somebody delete something from their social media accounts because A, that doesn't really feel very ethical, and B, the State Department might be able to see deleted posts anyway. So instead of going through and deleting a bunch of stuff, I think it's a better idea to just look at what you have out there, make sure it's accurate. And if there is anything that might lead to the wrong conclusion, you might want to be ready to explain that if it comes up during your interview. So that is the social media review. One additional thought here before I move on. So I mentioned that after your visa interview, if your officer is inclined to approve your application, they first have to place your application on pause, what's commonly referred to as administrative processing, while they review your social media. This can take anywhere from a day up to a couple of weeks. And so, again, it's a reminder that you should initiate this process early. Don't wait until the last minute, because if this delay takes a couple of weeks, that may push you beyond that program start date. And if you can't travel on time, that alone may result in a denial of your application. Okay, so enough about that. Let's talk about the visa interview, which is the most important, the most crucial stage of your journey. And I want to tell you what to expect in the interview, because I think if you don't know what you're getting into, it's virtually impossible to plan ahead. So, first of all, visa officers, at least for the United States, are not police officers. They're not law enforcement personnel. They don't wear bulletproof vests or uniforms. They don't carry guns. They look like me. They look like Courtney. They just look like regular people. And this is actually a photo of a real visa officer at our embassy in Seoul, South Korea. This is what I used to look like when I did this job. But even though they may look friendly, they are in a rush. I used to interview well over 100, often 150 applicants every single day. And that means that I had no more than 1, 2, maybe 3 minutes per interview. I had a lot that I was trying to do, just time and time and time again throughout my day. I was first looking at information on my computer screen, like DS 160 responses and other details that I could see about the applicant. And I was often looking at that over here without looking directly at the applicant as I started asking questions, because I'm trying to multitask to get through everything I needed to do as quickly as I could. So don't be alarmed at your interview if your officer doesn't look you in the eye. That's actually kind of expected, and I know it can be awkward, but unfortunately, it's part of the process. And then I would also recommend that you do speak English during the interview. One of the things that the officer is going to be trying to evaluate is, do you appear to speak at least a basic level of English, such that when you get to the United States, you will understand what's being taught in the classroom? Because, of course, if your English is not good enough to understand what's being taught, how can you actually learn and ultimately graduate? So, speak English during your interview, but don't feel like you have to speak perfect, unaccented, really complex sentence structures. That's not the expectation. The expectation is simply that you have a basic understanding of the language so that you can progress through your educational program. And then finally, some documents can be useful at the interview. You may want to bring some proof of your financial arrangements. You may want to bring a letter that confirms that you have a scholarship or that you've been admitted to a program. However, visa officers are trained not to look at documents. Documents can be confusing, they can be fake, they can just take a lot of time to understand. And so instead of looking at documents, visa officers are much more likely to evaluate their decision or reach their decision based upon the dialogue, the verbal conversation that they have with you. So don't be surprised if your officer doesn't want to see any documents. And don't try to shove documents in a little tray under the window. Instead, focus on explaining your qualifications verbally. And let's talk about what those qualifications are. This is probably the most important part of this presentation, so take note of what I'm about to say. During your visa interview, your visa officer is going to be thinking about or considering three issues as they try to determine whether they can say yes or no. Number one, do you look like you are a credible student? Do you appear to be somebody who, if you get this student visa, you are going to enter the United States, attend class, and ultimately graduate? Or is there a question about your real intention? Are you maybe trying to get this visa just to get into the United States to maybe find a job or move in with a family member? Number two, have you made sufficient arrangements to cover the cost of your tuition and your living expenses? And if you're bringing your family with you, have you made sufficient financial arrangements to cover their living expenses as well? Then number three, and this is often the most difficult thing to establish, are you going to leave the United States after you graduate? And this is commonly what we call having ties to home. Is there some compelling reason, or maybe multiple reasons, that you are likely to leave the country after you graduate? And now this is something that I think people don't generally understand. The way the law is written, there is a default assumption, or kind of the default decision is deny, unless you, the applicant, can establish why you should be approved. And so what that really means is it's your job, it's your responsibility in the visa interview to convince your officer that you should be approved. You have to kind of walk your officer through your qualifications so that they say yes at the end of your interview. And you do that by remembering these three criteria. Are you really going to study? Can you afford everything? Are you likely to leave the country after you graduate? So, my recommendation is for you to think about key details about your situation. Be prepared to volunteer these details during your interview. Do not wait for a specific question to offer a specific detail. Don't only answer with a short answer or maybe a yes or a no answer. Remember that if you don't convince your officer to say yes, you're going to be denied. And that means you have to be extremely proactive. Think about explaining first where you're going to school, what you are going to study, and then, really important, why have you reached this decision in your life? What is your motivation to go to the United States, a foreign country, to spend so much time, so much money to get this degree? What is it about the specific school that you selected that made you say, this is where I'm going? How are you going to pay for everything beyond just, I have enough money? Where did your money come from? And if you have maybe a sponsor, why is your sponsor investing in your education? And then crucially, remember, you have to show that you have ties to home. What are your plans after you graduate? Do you have a plan to get a specific job? Maybe you're hoping to work for a specific company. Maybe you have a job waiting for you after you graduate. This is where I want you to be as clear and detailed and specific as you can possibly be. Because remember, you have to convince your officer that you have a path that's likely to take you out of the United States. So this is what I want you to think about as you prepare for your interview. Remember, the name of the game here is be honest, but also be proactive. Volunteer as much detail as you can because you have to convince your officer to say yes. So I'm going to stop there. And before I take your questions, let me tell you where you can go to continue preparing. First of all of you will receive a link, and I think Courtney may even have something to share in the chat here. You will all receive a link to the Homebase platform where you can go through some video and text courses that walk you through a little bit more detail what I talked about today. So we have a course designed to introduce you to the DS-160. We have a course that walks you through the requirements that visa officers are considering for a student visa. And we also have a lesson on how to prepare for the interview. So I recommend that all of you start there because we have a lot of information that hopefully will help you navigate forward. Now, if you're still interested in some additional guidance and additional advice, there is a link in the Homebase platform to go to comprehensive guides that we've created. My partner and I were both former visa officers, both U.S. immigration attorneys, and we have put all of our expertise into a series of online courses through what we call ZF Visa Guides. So we have a comprehensive course that walks you through every question of the DS-160. We tell you how to complete the form on your own and avoid complications that are completely avoidable if you know what to do. We have a course that focuses on the interview itself, where we have videos of good and bad interviews. We offer a proven formula to help you successfully and effectively convey your qualifications to your visa officer. And then we have a comprehensive end-to-end guide. It starts from the I-20. It walks you through the DS-160, the interview. We talk about things like OPT and family members who may be traveling with you. And we include access to a live question and answer session every other week if you still have lingering questions about your interview process. So, as I was mentioning, start with the Homebase platform. Go through our guidance there. If you still have questions, follow the links to our courses. And then finally, if you have specific questions, or if maybe you just want to connect with either myself or my partner, Mandy, to do a practice interview with a former visa officer, reach out to us at info@zfvisa.com, or you can go to our website, zfvisa.com, and schedule time with us right there. We can walk you through practice interview questions, and we can also help you through other complications, like if you have a criminal record, or if you're stuck in a delay, or if you've been refused before. We can help you proceed and hopefully, again, put yourself in the best possible situation for a successful outcome. So with that, I want to open it up to your questions. Courtney, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Yeah, I have been keeping track of all the questions that have been coming in. There are some actually really great ones here. I'm going to start with sort of university themed questions that came in, and one that I think is a really common scenario that's come up a couple times in the questions here, which is what happens if you submit the DS-160 from one university, but then before your visa appointment, you decide that you want to go to another university? Or I guess I'm going to take that a little further too. What if you've already gotten your visa for one university and then you want to go to another university? What do you need to do?
Both really good questions. So let's start first with the DS-160. Now, and I'm going to even, I'll make this a little more general. So let's say that you have submitted a DS-160. And remember, when you submit that form, it locks your answers. You can't go back and change anything. So let's say that you realize that, oh no, I made a mistake. I answered a question wrong. Or maybe you change your mind. You're going to a different school. Well, what I would strongly recommend is that you submit an entirely new DS-160 with either the correct details or the updated school information. Then reach out to the embassy or consulate where you are going to appear for your interview. Let them know that you submitted a new DS-160, and give them the application ID number that appears on the new form. It's AA followed by a bunch of letters and numbers. That will hopefully get the embassy to update your interview profile so that only your responses from the new form are reviewed or visible by your new visa officer. And if you do change your mind on the school you're going to, it actually is really important that you submit a new DS 160 form because a lot of the details will be different. You'll be given a CVIS ID number that you have to enter from your I-20 form. Your addresses will be different. It may be, you may even be studying something different. So if you change your mind, it is important that you submit a new up-to-date DS 160 and again, reach out to that embassy or consulate where you scheduled your interview. Now, what if you've already gotten your visa? The second question that Courtney raised here. You've already gotten your visa and it says Travis University on it, but then you decide to go to a different school. Well, you actually have to apply for a new student visa if that happens. If you have not yet traveled to the United States, if you didn't start at that first school, you actually have to reapply for a new F1 visa for the school that you now plan to go to. Now, hopefully, this won't be a hard process. If you qualified for a student visa once, you should hopefully be able to qualify again. But I do want to make it clear that you are not generally allowed to travel to the United States for the first time if you're going to a different school other than what's listed on your visa. So I hope that helps.
Okay, great. So another question about university in general is, does the choice of an SEVP approved school, one over another, affect your visa issuance chances?
This is a really common question that students ask all the time. And let me be very clear here. Your choice of school is almost completely irrelevant. What really matters is how you explain why you reached this decision. Now, the one exception to that is if you're going to an Ivy League program like Harvard or Yale, then it's probably going to be slightly easier for you to get a student visa because visa officers know that those schools are highly selective. They only accept what, 0.1%, maybe less of applicants. And so those schools have done lots of due diligence and they're convinced that you're actually going to study. So a visa officer has less to worry about. Other than that, which are, obviously limited situations, it really doesn't matter what school you're going to. And I know this is hard to believe. What an officer wants to understand is, why are you going to the United States? Why are you going to this specific school in the United States? And maybe why are you studying this specific topic or for this specific major? The officer wants to understand your authentic, your real motivations. And let me offer a couple of tips here. This is where I think a lot of students encounter problems. When I was a visa officer, it was pretty common for student applicants I would ask them, why did you choose this school? And it was common for them to say something like, this school offers good curriculum. It has good professors. It will give me the skills I need for my career. Now think about that answer. It it's completely generic. Every school around the world probably has good curriculum. It probably has good professors or it wouldn't exist. So I want you to dig down deep, be really authentic, and talk about why this specific school is exciting to you. Why did you really decide to go to this school over anywhere else you could have gone in the world? Not just it's a good school, but tell me what it really is about that school that makes you want to say, this is where I'm going. This is where I'm going to invest my time and my money. That's what the visa officer needs to understand.
Okay, perfect. That is really good to know. So it sounds like huge tips are to make sure you know where you're going, know a little bit about the place you're going, what you're going to study, and the university itself.
That's right. And
Yeah.
and Courtney, sorry, one more thing here. I just saw a message came through. It was a private message, so I'm not going to read the whole thing, but came through from one of the attendees here saying, look, My officer asked me why I chose the United States and why I'm going to this program, and then they were denied. Now, this is pretty common, and anything could lead to a denial. I can't really say why somebody was denied without connecting with you one on one and really going through how your interview went. But I can tell you that in many situations, students are just not prepared to volunteer their authentic details, their authentic motivations. And it's exactly what we were just talking about here. Why did you choose a school? Not because it's going to give you the skills for your job. It has to be specific. So instead of just kind of explaining what sounds like a Google search result, dig down deep and talk about why you really chose a specific program, a specific school. That is really what the officer's looking for.
Okay, so I'm going to move a little bit into questions that are a little bit more about factors that would affect your visa approval. So I got quite a few questions about family in the US and whether or not having family in the US might affect your chances of visa approval. And then similarly, if someone plans to stay with family members that they have in the US, if that maybe negatively or positively affects the visa application.
Let me start by saying that there are a number of issues that are kind of red flags during the visa interview. None of these, well, some of these are not necessarily going to automatically disqualify you, but a lot of these are avoidable. So, first of all, vague responses, like we were just talking about, or short one word answers, that can kind of irritate or annoy a visa officer who's in a rush. That may result in a denial. Bringing in documents that look questionable or look like they've been altered, or maybe trying to rely on documents instead of just explaining your qualifications. That can result in a denial. Those are totally avoidable situations, right? But then another thing that is unavoidable is a situation like family in the United States. And the reason that this can be a red flag is, remember, you have to establish or convince your visa officer that you are likely going to leave the United States after you graduate. Now, if you have family in the United States, and also if you're planning to live with that family while you are studying, that can kind of erode that conclusion. It can lead an officer to start questioning if you're ever going to leave. If you have a place to live, if you have kind of a support network in the United States already, it's just too easy for you to stay. Now that's really unfair, right? I mean, just because you have some family in the United States, it shouldn't be that big of a concern. And it doesn't have to be. So if you have family in the United States, first of all, be honest about it. Don't try to hide that fact. Assume that your officer already knows anyway, and they probably do through various ways. So instead of trying to hide that, just be upfront about it. If the officer asks you about your family, say yes, this is who lives there, this is their status. But then my advice would be to redirect the focus of the interview back to your qualifications as a student. And so if the officer asks about your Uncle Jim who lives in the United States, be honest about your Uncle Jim, but then go back to explaining why you chose to go to this school, why you chose your specific major or degree program, and also what you're planning to do after you graduate. The more specific you can be about your goals or your plans outside of the United States, the more likely it is that your officer will conclude that, okay, even though your Uncle Jim lives in Chicago, you have a plan that's likely to take you somewhere else.
Okay, perfect. So on a similar note, another piece of that, what if I have a sibling that is currently studying in the US and I am also going to study or I'd like to study in the US? What should I say about that and how might that impact my application?
This is actually something that could be good. So first of all, I want you to be honest. I never want for you to just say something that sounds like the visa officer might want to hear it. But my suggestion, if you have a sibling or maybe any other family member who's currently studying in the United States, I would urge you to talk to them. Ask them about their experience in the country. What do they like about it? What do they not like about it? Is it exciting? Is it challenging? Get their real take on this experience, and you might talk about some of that during your interview. Something like, yeah, my sister Courtney is actually studying in the United States right now. We talk all the time. She's told me about how much she likes the food, and she's found a really cool international student organization, and she's doing this and this. And I'm really excited to get there and have a similar experience. That's a great way of, again, digging down, being authentic, and talking about why you personally are excited for this opportunity, why you're motivated to go to the United States. So, just because you have a family member who's studying or in the US on a visa, again, that's not an automatic disqualification. Try to use that factor to your advantage, and use it as an opportunity to maybe explain some of your decision making process.
Okay, great. Lots of questions still rolling in, and they're great questions, so keep them coming in the chat if you have them. Another one is about home ties. So it's a little bit of a specific situation from someone who is studying in the UK, but not from the UK, but has some concerns about how you might make those home tie connections in the interview in that situation. In this case, they also happen to have a spouse that is going to be remaining in the UK. But just generally speaking, if you're interviewing in a place that is not your home country, but you've been able to establish residence, what is your suggestion there?
This is a good question. And I will say this is very case or situation specific. Everybody is different. This is where I would urge you to reach out to us if you want to talk about your specific situation. But generally speaking, there is no requirement that students own property or have family members waiting for them or have a job waiting for them. If you're going in for a tourist visa, that can certainly help, right? Well, I own a house, I've got this 12-year career as an accountant. Those are good ways to show that you have ties to home. But as a student, you're quite often just kind of starting out in your adult life or your professional life. You don't have all of those factors, right? So the way that I often work with students is to help them identify, again, specifically what they are planning to do after they graduate. And this is where I would urge you to tell a bit of a story. And we talk about this a lot in our online courses. Think about exactly where you would like to work, the specific, job or position that you would like to have at that company, and then explain how this degree program will get you to that point in your life. If this degree was a key, what opportunity is that key unlocking for you outside of the United States? And again, I think a lot of students, they kind of default to a generic explanation, something like, after I graduate, I'm going to start my career. Well, that doesn't tell the officer anything. You have to be extremely specific. After I graduate, I'm really hoping to get a job at the Travis Company where I'm hopeful that I will qualify as an accounting manager because of this degree. You've got to go very specifically because you're kind of charting out a map for the visa officer to show them that your path is going to lead you out of the United States.
Okay, great. So another question about things that impact your visa approval chances are finances. And so, what recommendations do you have in presenting your proof of finances? And if you're getting a renewable scholarship or something from a university, what sort of documentation should you bring with you? And how does that impact your chances of being approved?
So, for your financial arrangements, think about how and why. How do you have enough money? Or how does maybe a sponsor have enough money? And then why is that sponsor or why are you investing in your education? Those are the key questions here. Anybody could say, like, I could sit here in front of all of you and say, I'm a multimillionaire. I have enough money for this program. Well, I'm not a multimillionaire. I wish I was. And so just a blanket statement like that is not really going to, bring a lot of confidence to your officer. Instead, the more context you can offer, the more detail you can offer, that's what will bring confidence. So again, the how and the why needs to come into your explanation. I've been working as an accountant for the last 12 years at the Travis Company. And during that whole time, I've been saving up money as much as I can in my own savings account so that I can go and get this MBA degree. Then, so with context like that, that helps. Then I would also recommend that you have some sort of documentation to prove your financial situation. Now, if you're paying for your school yourself, that could be something as simple as a bank statement showing the balance of your savings account. If a parent or an uncle or a company or somebody else is going to pay for your education, something similar showing that that individual or that company has pledged this amount of money for you can also help. Of course, every situation is different. So think about, something on paper that can corroborate or establish that what you're saying is true can be useful. But I'm going to go back to a point that I made earlier. Visa officers generally do not want to see any documents. So even though you might have a whole stack of financial records to prove your situation, don't expect that your officer wants to see any of that. Bring it with you in case the officer asks for it. But instead of trying to shove a bunch of pieces of paper in the little tray in front of you, instead verbalize your situation. Explain the details about how you have the money and why either you or somebody else is investing, and that will go a long way towards, explaining your finances.
Okay, so next question is about speaking English in interviews and how it might impact an applicant. So, if a student is applying for a program here in the US to study English and they may have a little bit more limited English ability, what is the best way to approach the interview?
So if you are studying English in the United States, chances are good that, it's not going to be a 10-year language program. It's probably a year or maybe even less. And so I think there's still an expectation that you have some basic fundamental understanding of the language. So my advice would be start the interview in English. Answer the first question in English. At least, explain where you're going to school and what you will be studying in English. Then you might politely ask if you can switch to your native language for the rest of the interview. But you do need to show the officer that at least you're not starting from zero. You have some basic knowledge of English before you transfer to your own language.
Okay, so I had lots of social media questions come in, and we're coming up on the hour here, so I want to make sure I get some of those in. So, one of them is, I think, really important. What if you've already filled out your DS-160 and as you said, you were sleeping 2 a.m., you woke up, you realized that you forgot to put one of those social media accounts you had on it? What is the step-by-step sort of next thing to do in order to correct this situation? And do you have to? Is there any way to get around updating your DS-160 if you forgot a social media account?
I have encountered far too many applicants in this situation who have been refused to say that you can just let it go. I think that if you realize that you have left off even one social media account from your form, you really should consider filling out a new form, putting all of the accounts in it, submitting that, then notify the embassy or consulate that you have done so. It is that crucial to your chance of success that I would recommend that. I know filling out this form is not fun, it can take a long time, but it's important. The other thing I will say, though, is that you should do this as soon as you realize the mistake. Most of the time, an embassy or a consulate will let you submit a new DS-160 and they will update your interview profile with that new application ID number from the new form only once before your interview date. They will not allow you to update your profile if you're within about a week, maybe even 10 days of your interview date. So all of this is don't delay, jump on this as early as you can, reach out to the embassy. If they refuse to update your profile, you may have a couple of options. This is where you really should reach out to an immigration lawyer. Depending on the situation, you might be able to bring your new confirmation sheet with you to the interview. You may actually just need to cancel your interview and schedule a new interview. But if you find yourself in that situation, reach out to us and we'll need to evaluate your situation and then provide some advice.
Great. And I think that's just a great thing to mention at this moment as well, is that this webinar is a great overview of how to approach the visa interview for anyone who has a very simple, straightforward situation. You very clearly meet the criteria. But there's a lot of students out there where the situation is just a little bit more complex and you may need some additional one-on-one guidance. And so if you're interested in that one-on-one guidance, you can reach out to Travis and his partner as well directly. And all that information can be accessed through the link, the course link that I put previously in the chat. So if you think your situation's a little bit more complicated, you need to go over it one-on-one, or you want more in-depth support, it's definitely out there and available. I would also say make sure you really look at the resources that you're using when you're looking at support for visa interviews. There's a lot of different sources out there and they're not all the same. And so Travis, he offers a really great opportunity to get good support. And so just want to point out that you can also get additional support after this more one-on-one. Okay, lots more questions here. So I want to get to the visa bans at least, but one more social media one, two social media ones. The first one is, what about TikTok? So someone had trouble finding TikTok on the drop down, but they have a TikTok account. How do they provide this?
It's very strange that TikTok is not on the drop down menu, but of course MySpace is. Who knows why this is the case? So two thoughts here. One is you're really only required to list the accounts that appear in that menu. If you have a TikTok account, or if you have maybe a personal website or a blog or something else, there is another question. Actually, I'm going to share my screen one more time and I'll try to show you this. There is one more question here. And now it's not going to cooperate with me. Give me a second. Well, okay, never mind. It's not going to work. There is one more question that asks if you have any other platforms, any other social media or online platforms that you would like to list. That's where I would recommend that you type in your TikTok account information. My screen has gone black, Courtney. Can you still see me?
I can see you. Everything's working
Okay,
perfect.
good. Zoom has eaten my computer, unfortunately.
Well, thanks for continuing on. We proceed. Okay, so next social media question for you is, if you've had an account that you deleted, deactivated 2 years ago, Facebook, whatever it is, should you include that?
Yes. If you
Okay.
if you have had an account within the past 5 years, you must mention that. I actually, to be totally transparent, I do not know exactly what tools the State Department is using to look through social media. However, I am aware that they can find accounts that have been deleted. So don't leave this to chance. List everything.
Okay, great. And then I want to make sure we get to visa bans. I know we're coming up on time here, but for students who are impacted by a current partial visa ban or full visa ban, what is the chance that they might get changed? Is there anything they can do in this situation, or do they just have to wait around and see what happens?
Yeah, this is a really unfortunate situation. And I will tell you, nobody knows exactly what's going to happen. We don't have a crystal ball. We cannot read the future, unfortunately. For the 75 countries that are subject to the visa pause, that would include countries like Nigeria, where I work with a lot of students from Nigeria. Uh, the only thing you can do, unfortunately, is kind of wait for an update. I understand that the embassy in Nigeria is still conducting student visa interviews, but they are not able to approve anything until that pause is lifted. They're essentially placing people under administrative processing, which is kind of like pushing the pause button. Some people have asked me, does it even make sense to schedule an interview right now, or should I just wait? I'm not sure I can answer that. I think scheduling it now might be smart because if and when that pause is lifted, there may be a flood of people trying to schedule an interview. You may not be able to find time. But again, we don't know when this pause will be lifted. So you may spend the money, the time, the effort, you go to the interview, you never actually get the visa. The fact that the State Department is referring to this as a pause and not kind of a more permanent ban does lead me to conclude that this is temporary, but I don't know how long it's going to last. Now, for the other countries that are actually subject to a more kind of permanent ban, again, I don't know how that's going to shape out. There is a lot of pending lawsuit action. Immigration attorneys are filing lawsuits against the US government almost every day, if not every week, to challenge these policies. There's a chance at any day that some of these could be changed or struck down. But again, we don't know how this is going to shape out. So, my advice to all of you, if you find that you're subject to one of these restrictions, monitor the news. And I will pull up a State Department website. I'll put in the chat window here. The State Department, here it is, has a website that kind of offers visa updates. And so I would urge you to bookmark this website, check it every few days, maybe every few weeks. And that's probably a good place to find out if something has changed. Also reach out to an immigration lawyer. We can give you some updates as well.
Okay, so I know I said that was the last question. I have two more.
All right.
One pretty quick. If someone's doing an ESL program, would it be, and their English is kind of okay but not great, would it be better to do the interview in English or in the language of the country where they live?
Start in English at the very least. If you can go through the whole interview in English, I would urge you to do so. That will help because, again, the officer wants to make sure you have at least a fundamental knowledge of English. But if you really don't feel comfortable, at least start in English, then you might change to your native language.
Okay, and the last one is a little bit more just functional, but I thought it was great to ask just because it is a recommendation that you print your DS-160 so that you remember what you answered, just in case you wonder, did I include that or did I not include that social media account? You can actually go and look. But at what point in the process do you have to print it? Is it as you're
Mm.
submitting each page? Can you do it after you push submit? Do you do it before? Just so as they're filling it out, they know when to prep to print things.
So technically, you can save a PDF of your responses right after you click submit. But if you close that browser window, you cannot go back and see any of your responses. So my general tip is before you hit the submit button, there's a kind of a stage where you review all of your responses. Take a screenshot or print out each section of your answers at the review stage. Then once you hit submit, if you accidentally close the browser window, you have a record of it.
Okay, great advice. So for everyone who put all of your fantastic questions in the chat and I did not get to your very specific question, I'm sorry. I tried to get as much as I could in there. But please do feel free to reach out to us. So we are all available. I'm going to once again put the links to the course in the chat. So this is the best way to continue this conversation, get Travis's contact information, see some of the additional resources that they have available over at ZF Visa Guides. You can also reach out to us anytime directly at Homebase. I put our emails in the chat and we'll be happy to get you in the right direction of what resources you might need. And then also we have a number of additional webinars coming up. So I put a link to that. We will be doing additional visa application webinars here coming up throughout the summer. So if you'd like to attend another one, if anything has changed, we'll make sure we address all of those things as well in future webinars. So Thank you to everyone who attended. Travis, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us. Very much appreciated. And thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Good luck to you all.